Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. A woman in her 30s, 3 years ago, took her own life. Her mother helped her to have enough morphine to make sure she could do it. Lynn Gilderdale was severely ill with ME since she was 14. For more than half her life, all of her adult life, she was confined to bed. She couldn't move, she couldn't swallow food, she couldn't speak. She was in unrelenting pain, sensitivity and other symptoms. Before she died, Daily Mail journalist Jill Swain saw her and said afterwards, "I had seen African children starving, met people dying of AIDS, patients paralysed from the neck down, others in the last stages of terminal cancer, but I had never seen a living person as desperately ill as Lynn." What hope did Lynn have? According to the ME Association, there are about 250,000 people in the UK who have ME. That's as many as about 1 in every 250 people, and about twice as many as the number of people with MS. ME affects millions of people around the world. Of course, many aren't as severely ill as Lynn, but around a quarter of them are housebound or bedbound. And more than half of all long-term absence from school due to illness is because of ME. Apparently, I was a very happy baby. I was always giggling and I always liked being with people. When I was just over 1 year old, I was suddenly very ill. I did lose a lot of weight and I was always being sick after I ate anything. I went into hospital for a few weeks and I recovered. They never could explain what that was. School was good. I got straight A's. I played the piano. I was leader of the school orchestra. I played in bands. I acted on stage and I did lighting backstage. I was rubbish at most sports, but I could run fast. I got into Cambridge University, and after being homesick for a little while, I had a great time there. I studied hard to get a 2-1 and a Master's in Structural Engineering. I was busy there at church and at Christian Union. I was busy with music. I volunteered at the local homeless hostel, and I cycled everywhere, fast. I was doing 10-mile hill walks in Austria, and I danced on stage in the world amateur premiere of Singing in the Rain. My mum had had ME for a couple of years when I was about 12 years old, so I knew a bit about it, but she got well again and she's been working full-time since then, and she's been tap dancing, and she's been fit and well. It never crossed my mind that anything like that could ever happen to me. Well, you don't, do you? But in the winter of my last year at university, I became quite ill, and it was suspected that I'd suffered from carbon monoxide poisoning, possibly from a gas fire over a period of time, although that wasn't ever actually confirmed. That summer I had migraines, I had the flu. I also had exciting things. I was graduating from university and I was starting my first job and everything like that. Just 2.5 months into my first job as a structural engineer in Ipswich, I had to go and work in Peterborough for a day. I took the train to Peterborough, and as soon as I got there, I had to start looking at big building plans on a microfilm reader. And I suddenly started to feel unimaginably ill and dizzy. I didn't know what to do. I very nearly got the office to phone for an ambulance. I just felt so ill. But I thought, I really don't want to be stuck in Peterborough. So instead, I got them to phone for a taxi, and then I very nearly got the taxi to bring me all the way back home to Felixstowe. Whatever it would have cost, I just felt so ill. But no, I went to the station, and somehow, I don't know how, I got the train back home and I went straight to bed. I was feeling unbearably sick and dizzy. I was nauseous. I couldn't read. I had terrible headaches. My neck was stiff and ached. My back ached. My gut ached. I had irritable bowel syndrome problems. I kept needing to go for a wee almost non-stop. At one point I was going more than 20 times in a day. My record was 5 times in 1 hour. And bear in mind, that is really tough when you're so ill you can barely get out of bed. I had a sore throat, swollen glands, a fever. I felt travel sick and hungover. I hadn't drunk anything. I was extremely tired all the time and spaced out. I had no energy at all. I felt very emotional. I had low blood pressure. I kept nearly fainting. My pulse was racing. I was very sensitive to temperature and to noise. And I turned yellow. I was in bed for 3 weeks. I tried forcing myself back into work again, but then I had an awful relapse and I was in bed for another 3 weeks. Blood tests confirmed that I had a severe infection called cytomegalovirus. My unhelpful GP at the time said, "Well, I don't think that ME exists, but I think that you've got it." Basically, I never got better. For a time, I struggled back to work part-time. People were telling me I could just gradually build up until I was full-time and I'd be fine. But I wasn't. I was so ill. I could only actually think one step at a time. I'd wake up in the morning, have my breakfast. The only thing I could think about was walking to the bus stop. At the bus stop, my only goal in life was to get on the bus and survive a 40-minute journey. When I got off the bus, the only thing I could think was a 10-minute walk into work. And I knew the route so well, I knew the route from every little piece of shadow to the next, so I could walk straight from one shadow to the next to avoid the sun, so I just couldn't bear the heat at all. I'd work for 2 or 3 hours, I'd walk back to the bus station, survive the journey home, go straight back to bed in the middle of the afternoon, get up for supper, back to bed again, and the same the next day. It was unbelievably horrible. And with hindsight, it was totally the wrong thing to do. I was pushing myself so hard to do that actually made me worse and more ill for a lot longer. I eventually saw 5 different consultants. I had dozens of blood tests, scans, neurological tests, hormone tests, endoscopies, and all sorts. And they couldn't find anything wrong. In fact, they said I should actually have been really fit and healthy, but I wasn't. So they confirmed ME. They also said I've got a problem with my liver, and also found out I was allergic to gluten and dairy, which I now have to avoid like the plague at my peril. So being on the gluten-free diet means I don't have any bread, or cakes, or biscuits, or pasta, or pastry. Dairy-free means I can't have milk, or butter, or cheese, or margarine, yogurts, ice cream, which does make it difficult for eating out. I tried a few different medications, but even just tiny doses made me extremely ill and gave me terrible nightmares even for weeks after I'd stopped taking it. I even had the same effect with homeopathy. I know a lot of people don't believe that homeopathy works. I'd just take one sugar pill that's homeopathic, and for a whole week after that I'd be yellow. ME is a neurological illness. It stands for Myalgic Encephalomyelitis. Myalgic means it affects the muscles, encephalo means it affects the brain, and myelitis means an inflammation of the nervous system. ME could actually cover a number of different closely related illnesses. It's also referred to as chronic fatigue syndrome, which could embrace an even wider range of illnesses. Although calling something chronic fatigue syndrome is rather like calling Alzheimer's chronic forgetfulness syndrome, because saying you're just tired all the time doesn't cut it at all. The main thing with ME isn't just being tired, it isn't fatigue, it's much more severe than that. After the smallest amount of physical exertion or mental concentration, you suddenly feel the most awful exhaustion and sickness you could ever imagine. In fact, probably a lot worse than you could imagine. When I was really ill, just walking for 5 minutes meant that my body reacted as if I'd run a half marathon. ME means that our mitochondria, which are things that make energy in every cell throughout our bodies, don't work properly. ME means that our hormones aren't controlled properly, that we can't control and regulate our body temperature, we're too sensitive to cope with light and sound and smell. ME means that the immune system doesn't work properly, that the heart doesn't pump blood with oxygen and sugar around the body properly. ME was first reckoned to be recognised in the 1930s, but it could well have been around a long time before that. It's thought that Florence Nightingale might have had ME. There have been about 4,000 or 5,000 studies that all show all the abnormalities and things that go wrong inside the bodies of people with ME, but it's still not known what causes it. There is inflammation, the immune system's out of balance, the body's stress response systems are chronically fixed on. Personally, I think the root of ME is a tiny little gland in the brain called the hypothalamus, and studies have shown that that goes wrong in people with ME. The hypothalamus is like the body's thermostat, or the volume knob on the brain's input. It takes feedback from all around the body via the hormones and the nervous system, And it also controls everything that goes on inside the body and how it reacts to things from outside the body as well, through our sensors, to responses to stress and to infections, and to things like noise and smell and to pain. ME most typically starts after a severe virus or a similar type of illness. Other triggers include exposure to toxic chemicals, to pesticides, vaccinations, occasionally to a physical trauma or brain injury, and it can quite often be exacerbated by major life stresses and emotional pressures. Sometimes it has occurred in epidemics, 50 or 60 people at a time getting ME in one town. It's most common to get ME between the age of your mid-teens and your 40s, although it can affect people of all ages, including young children. Around 2 or 3 times more women get ME than men. So what hope is there? Well, there's no cure, which is why much better research is needed. Research and treatment of ME has probably been put back 20 or 30 years in this country because of psychiatrists persuading the government and doctors that ME is not a real illness, but instead that it's a mistaken belief or a fear that you're ill when you're not really ill. I can tell you that ME is real. Lynn Gilderdale knew that ME was real. The 4,000 or 5,000 medical studies have shown that ME is real. And all the adults and children with ME who have been forcibly removed from their homes and their families and have been forced to have unhelpful, even harmful and horrific treatments, like being thrown into a swimming pool and allowed to sink because they're too ill to swim, because chronic fatigue syndrome has been labelled as a psychiatric illness, those people could all tell you that ME is real. That boy was taken out of the swimming pool before he drowned. ME is not the same thing as depression. Now, genuine clinical depression is a horrendous illness. It can steal your control over your own thoughts and feelings, it can steal your motivation, and it can steal a big part of your life. But it's not the same thing as ME. With depression, exercising quite often makes you feel better. ME, by definition, means that when you exercise, you feel worse, always. Every one of the hundreds of people I've met with ME have all been very highly motivated. They all want to get well. They've got a huge list of things they want to do when they are well. They're going to put the world to rights. They want to be the best of everything they can, and they want to enjoy life. Of course, it's possible to have 2 different illnesses, ME and depression, at the same time. And I don't think anyone who hasn't been there could imagine what an awful double whammy that must be. And yes, also, as with all disabling long-term illnesses, having ME can give you secondary depression. As you lose your confidence, you lose your career and your work or school or university, you lose your health and your stamina, even the ability to do normal day-to-day tasks. You lose your hobbies, you lose the ability to be spontaneous, you have to plan in advance, depending on how much energy you think you're going to have, although you never know. You lose income and financial security, you lose friends and relationships, you lose your future plans, you lose independence, and you lose hope. But there is hope. Many people with ME are getting better. There's people making a partial recovery, or even a full recovery, or maybe that's just a remission. People are enjoying time with friends and families, they're working part-time, or even going back into high-powered careers. And there's people finding their true vocations, people returning to sports and hobbies and dancing and holidays and more, and feeling well. Teenagers often make quicker and more full recoveries than people who have ME when they're older, even if they've been severely bedbound for a time, although not always. I'm a lot better than I was. I'm probably about 2/3 of the way back to being completely well from where I was. That's thanks to a combination of rest, taking time to heal, pacing myself and gradually building up what I've been able to, eating well, having enough nutritional supplements that if you shook me I'd probably rattle, trying to avoid unhelpful household chemicals and toiletries, and also chiropractic treatment and reflexology. I still do need to rest. I can't do any high energy activities, I can't do any sports, I can't walk really long distances or travel very far very easily. And it's also difficult, so I just want to be able to get well, but as they say, life keeps getting in the way. But hopefully I'll keep getting there. I've been sharing my experiences about ME on YouTube in videos I've been making at getwellfromme.com. And I've been truly humbled by the hundreds and hundreds of incredibly grateful, tear-soaked messages that I've been receiving around the world, saying things like, after 10 years of being too ill to do anything, my family have watched your videos, and for the first time they can finally start to understand my illness and are now actually trying to support me. People are now saying they don't feel alone or as if they're going mad, and we're sharing hope. But there are many people who are ill with ME who are desperate to get well. They've tried treatment after treatment, but they're still severely ill. And it's definitely not any fault of their own. It's not because they're not trying hard enough or they don't want to get well. Maybe for some, the initial virus or the other triggers were so severe that it damaged their neuroimmune system so badly that it's almost impossible to recover until a real cure is found for them. Or maybe it is this underlying mechanism behind the ME which we don't really fully understand yet. And maybe even people who have recovered from ME, as opposed to just some general fatigue, perhaps they haven't 100% fully recovered, maybe they're only 95% in remission, and even for them this unknown cause underlying it is still there. Some people do find that they're left with some kind of scar of ME when they get better, perhaps just an awareness that they can't overdo things too much, or they've got boundaries for their energy levels they have to learn to live within. ME is often a fluctuating illness as well, and people do experience relapses, especially when they're exposed to the same triggers again. There is hope as well because research is improving. Just this year there's been an international consensus panel of 26 world experts with 400 years of combined ME research experience who've treated over 50,000 ME patients. And they've come together and for the first time have published all the best understanding about ME all together in one place. There's just been a campaign launched to raise money to set up a National Research and Treatment Centre at the Norwich and Norfolk Hospital and at the University of East Anglia. And just yesterday, doctors in Norway said that they'd found that 10 out of 15 patients with ME improved because of an anti-lymphoma cancer drug. But hopes have been dashed in the past. People thought that the human herpes virus 6 was going to be the virus, and if you treated that, that would cure ME. But that hasn't. And more recently they thought it was the XMRV xenotropic murine retrovirus, but that seems to have been discounted as well now. That's a retrovirus like HIV. Thankfully, I was never quite as desperately ill with my ME as Lynn Gilldale was. But there were a lot of nights that I felt so unbearably sick that I was in agony. I was awake all night, curled up in a ball, and crying and groaning. And there were a few nights when I actually prayed that I wouldn't wake up the next morning. It was just so unbearable. I still don't feel I've been able to have much of a life since I left university. I was virtually housebound for so many years. I wouldn't wish ME on my worst enemy, even if I had any, which I don't. I felt like I lost out on so much. It hurts so much when people are supposed to be closest to you who don't believe you. They say you're lazy, or that you're not trying hard enough to get well, or they tell you to snap out of it, and you can't. All you wish is that you could be better. But I've learned so much too, including not to use up precious energy, holding grudges, or being angry with people. I haven't been perfect too. I've got frustrated, I've been impatient, I get irritable, and I always overreact to things. I found people with ME are always the most sensitive, and that's not always a good thing. For my worst years, I couldn't even bear to hear any music, not even on the radio. It just moved me too much, I'd burst into tears. But now I'm actually hoping to use music as part of my work. I am looking forward now with hope, and that's a wonderful thing. But the other thing I've learnt deep in my heart is that my hope ultimately isn't in my health, or in fulfilment, or my career, or money, or recognition. As a Christian, my hope is in Jesus and his promises, and in a day where there'll be no crying or sickness or death. Has it been difficult to keep believing through all of that? Yeah, certainly. Have I been able to make sense of all of it? No, not all of it. But I've learned that my value isn't in what I do, There's a time when I couldn't even read for half an hour in a day. My value isn't in what I achieve or what people say about me. My value isn't in doing, but it's as a human being created by God. There is hope. People are getting better from ME. There is hope in research making important steps forward now. But I believe there's a hope beyond these two, and that's where my hope will be.